Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I'll give my little fight prediction on this fight. This fight, I do believe, is happening about a month later, a little bit over a month, I believe. It is going to be happening. I think this fight's going to be happening on May 5th, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, I'm very excited for this fight, man. I think that it's a tremendous fight. I think that it's an A-class fight. And the fight that, of course, I'm talking about, if you don't know, is the Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders fight. Now, before I talk about how good of a fight I believe that this is, you're going to hear a certain amount of the mainstream boxing channels because a certain amount of the mainstream boxing channels, once again, they are part of the LDBC. They are part of new media. And I've already told people what their objective is. So it is what it is when it comes down to it. But anyway, Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, has been the number one pound for pound fighter ever since Vasily Lomachenko's recent loss to Teofimo Lopez last year. You could even debate Canelo Alvarez was the number one pound for pound fighter before that, though. But when it comes down to it, what I'll say is this. Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, he's been on quite the tear recently. Now, his last fight against Ildrum, of course, in my opinion, was not against a very elite fighter. I think we all know that. But what you're going to hear from a certain amount of the LDBC and new media channels, which, once again, pro-black channels, and a certain amount of people are not going to like that. It is what it is. What you're going to hear from them is that this is not a very elite fight because it's not against Demetrius Andrade, it's not against Jamal Charlo, and it's not against the David Benavidez. But the truth is about Billy Joe Saunders might be better than all those fighters. And a certain amount of people may disagree with me. When I take a look at Demetrius Andrade, when I take a look at Jamal Charlo, when I take a look at David Benavidez, I think they're all more hittable than Billy Joe Saunders. I think they all have more faults than Billy Joe Saunders. And listen, this is a very intriguing matchup because Billy Joe Saunders is an extremely slick fighter. He's very maneuverable. I think he has very good footwork, very good head movement when it comes down to it. Billy Joe Saunders is just very, very slippery and he's very hard to catch. Now we'll see, and this is where I don't know if Billy Joe Saunders is going to be quite as successful. We'll see if he's going to be able to hit Canelo Alvarez enough because it's very risky sometimes to try to go in there against Canelo Alvarez because Canelo Alvarez is just so damn accurate. I did a prediction, obviously, of course, not too long ago because the Callum Smith versus Canelo Alvarez fight didn't happen that long ago. But I did a prediction where I said, Callum Smith, what he wants to do is that sometimes he wants to go on the inside and try to rough Canelo Alvarez up, but you want to try to stick your jab out there consistently, sometimes move at angles. I think Callum Smith tried to do that, but he just did not have the speed nor the defense to really handle Canelo Alvarez's skill set. Billy Joe Saunders is going to be much faster than a Callum Smith. I think that he's more skilled than a Callum Smith. I think he's much more maneuverable. And this is really going to be a big question with Canelo Alvarez. Can he handle this type of style? Because the last time we really seen Canelo Alvarez have a great amount of trouble with an opponent, besides Gennady Golovkin, was probably against an Erislandy Lara, who was a very defensively sound fighter and a very slick fighter, which usually those Cuban fighters tend to be, or at least the upper echelon of Cuban fighters tend to be. But when it comes down to it, Billy Joe Saunders, out of all the fighters, the former fighters that used to be at 160, including Demetrius Andrade, Jamal Charlo, and maybe a couple others that I'm forgetting to mention, Billy Joe Saunders might actually be the biggest threat for Canelo Alvarez out of all of them. That's my opinion. That's the way that I see it. But I'm not sure necessarily how you guys see it. That's just the way that I personally see it. But when it comes down to it, who do I think is going to win this fight and why? Well, right now, I do have to go with Canelo Alvarez. I think Canelo Alvarez has been on a tear. I believe that Canelo Alvarez is such an accurate puncher, such a great counter puncher, and really just such a complete fighter that it's really going to be hard for Billy Joe Saunders to get in there and possibly get off some of his punches. But I want to see how Canelo Alvarez looks against Billy Joe Saunders because I want to see how well Billy Joe Saunders moves at certain angles, puts Canelo Alvarez in awkward spots. I want to see if he's constantly moving from side to side and constantly on his toes. Because if Billy Joe Saunders does the same thing that Erislandy Lara did, who knows? Canelo Alvarez might have a very big problem with Billy Joe Saunders. In my opinion, what Billy Joe Saunders wants to do, he pretty much wants to stay on his toes the whole entire night, try to jab Canelo Alvarez to death, throw a right hand to the body here and there, throw, a 1-2 to the body here and there. If he tries to trap you in a corner, either suffocate him by tying him up or sometimes go up to him, throw a couple body shots, then move off immediately. And that's pretty much going to be the whole entire game plan for Billy Joe Saunders. And I think he's going to try that. I think Billy Joe Saunders is going to try to move around the whole entire night, and that's what he should try to do with the Canelo Alvarez. Now, I've also seen a certain amount of people say that they believe that Canelo could stop Billy Joe Saunders. It is very possible because Canelo Alvarez does have a decent amount of power. And usually when it comes to fighters around his own same size, or at least, people who are not natural 168 pounders, it is possible for them to probably get hurt. So we'll see what happens. This is not going to be a very long video because in my opinion there's not a whole lot to break down here. I think Billy Joe Saunders' game plan is very obvious. I'm pretty sure that's what he has to do. I don't see him doing it any other way. I'm not saying sometimes you don't want to go on the inside with Canelo Alvarez and try to suffocate him. I do think that he will have to tie Canelo Alvarez up a lot of the times. But Billy Joe Saunders, one thing that he does not have elite power. So I don't think that he can go on the inside with the Canelo Alvarez a whole lot. I think he's going to have to stay on his toes. I think he's going to have to stay on the outside a certain amount of the times. And he is going to have to throw a decent amount more than Canelo Alvarez. All right? He's going to have to make sure that he gets points on the scorecards. All right? Because he cannot just be afraid of Canelo Alvarez's counters and overall, just expect to win points on the scorecards and throw the same amount as Canelo Alvarez. I noticed that with certain opponents, they're almost afraid to throw with him. And that's understandable because he is an excellent counterpuncher. But let's just see what happens. If I had to guess what's going to happen, Billy Joe Saunders most likely is going to probably be afraid to throw at certain times because of Canelo Alvarez's counterpunching ability. But we'll see what happens. If there is anyone, in my opinion, out of Charlo, Andrade, Saunders, David Benavidez, out of that little group, if there's anyone that could potentially beat Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, it would be Billy Joe Saunders. He is extremely fast. He is extremely maneuverable. He is extremely quick. We'll just have to see what happens. And I think he's a decently intelligent fighter. So we'll see what happens. I think that this is a great fight. And if Canelo Alvarez were able to beat Billy Joe Saunders convincingly, it would be another A-grade win in his career. In my opinion, Billy Joe Saunders is certainly an A-class fighter. Callum Smith, maybe you can debate, was a B-class fighter. But Billy Joe Saunders, there is no doubt with his resume, and I'm not saying that he has a great amount of A-class wins, but he certainly has beat fighters dominantly, certain fighters overall that were once looked at as very decent top contenders, like an Andy Lee, like a David Lemieux, maybe even a couple of others if you really wanted to go there. But when it comes down to it, there is no doubt about it. This is an A-grade fight to me. I believe that this is an excellent fight, and if Canelo Alvarez looks very dominant in this fight, I think it'll just be another mark for greatness for him. Because in my opinion, Billy Joe Saunders is pretty much on the same level as a Jamal Charlo and as a Demetrius Andrade, if not even a little bit better than those fighters. And a certain amount of people may disagree. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. My prediction is Canelo Alvarez. I believe that Billy Joe Saunders is going to have a very tough time trying to get out on Canelo Alvarez. And I believe he is eventually going to get trapped into a game of when is the correct time to throw. Because Canelo Alvarez's counterpunching ability is just so amazing when it comes down to it that it's just very hard to know when to get punches in on him. But if Billy Joe Saunders wants to beat Canelo, he's going to have to constantly move side to side. He's going to have to constantly be on his toes, throw his jab out there, go to the body a little bit. Don't be afraid to go to the body. Most fighters are against Canelo Alvarez. Tie him up a lot. And I think that's the key to possibly beat Canelo Alvarez. That's if he's not adjusted to that type of style even still at this point in time in his career. So we'll see what happens. But I think this is an excellent fight. And once again, you're going to hear from a certain amount of the LDBC new media channels that this is not an excellent fight. No, this is an excellent fight. This is pretty much, on the same level. Now, maybe not in terms of popularity, but it is pretty much on the same level as if he was going to fight a Jamal Charlo. So it is what it is. Anyways, that really is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully y'all have a wonderful day. And let me know what your comments and opinions are about this, because I think this is an excellent fight. But we'll see what happens. My prediction is Canelo Alvarez by unanimous decision. We'll see what happens. But anyways, thank you ladies and gentlemen for watching. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to y'all later.